Case 1. Robin Lee Rowe, 1992. The smell hit them first. Not just smoke, accelerant. Fire investigators stepped through the charred skeleton of the duplex on Seneca Street in Boise, Idaho, their boots crunching over blackened debris. Then they saw it. Smoke alarm after smoke alarm, batteries removed, pulled out, deliberately disabled. Accelerant trails snaked through the living room, down hallways, into bedrooms. Multiple ignition points. This wasn't an accident. Someone made sure no one would wake up. And inside that cremated home, 3 people never did. Randy Rowe was 34 years old. He worked at Boise Cascade, the kind of steady job that kept food on the table and weekends free for what mattered most, his kids. Every Saturday, if the weather held, he'd load up 10-year-old Joshua and 8-year-old Tabitha and head to the river. Fishing rods, tackle boxes, sandwiches wrapped in foil. Joshua would talk non-stop about his baseball card collection, flipping through stats like a seasoned scout. Tabitha was quieter, more observant, always the one to spot the fish before anyone else. She had a laugh that carried over water, bright and unguarded. Their duplex on Seneca Street wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. Bikes leaned against the porch. A basketball hoop hung crooked over the driveway. Neighbors waved. Life was ordinary in the best possible way. Until the early hours of February 10th, 1992, when everything ordinary burned. Flames erupted at multiple points throughout the home. Not one fire, several. Investigators would later trace accelerant residues through living areas, bedrooms, even the hallway. The front door was locked from the inside. No forced entry. No sign of a break-in. Whoever set this blaze had a key, had access, had time, and they'd made sure no one would escape. Smoke alarms, batteries removed, circuit breakers disabled, exit routes blocked. Every safety measure that should have given Randy, Joshua, and Tabitha even a chance to wake up, to run, to survive, stripped away with cold, methodical precision. Neighbors reported seeing a woman in a nightgown walking away from the house just before the flames became visible. Calm, unhurried. She didn't scream, didn't bang on doors for help. She just walked. And then, minutes later, she returned, stood outside, watched her home burn. That woman was Robin Lee Rowe. Wife, mother. When investigators dug into Robin's background, the pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. She had taken out life insurance policies on Randy, Joshua, and Tabitha, naming herself the sole beneficiary. The combined total? $276,500. For a family struggling to get by, that was a fortune. And Robin had been planning to collect. But this wasn't her first fire. In 1980, while living in California, Robin's 6-year-old son, Keith, died in a house fire. Investigators at the time ruled it suspicious, but couldn't prove arson. Robin walked away with a $28,000 insurance payout. Keith's death was written off as a tragic accident, a grieving mother's misfortune. Now, 12 years later, 3 more bodies, 3 more insurance policies. Same woman. The trial began in December of 1993. Prosecutors laid it out in brutal detail. The disabled alarms, the accelerant patterns, the locked doors. Robin's calm demeanor as she watched her family burn. Her financial motive. The prior fire in California. Witnesses described her behavior that night. Detached, eerily composed. No tears, no panic, just cold, calculated observation. The defense tried to argue coincidence, tried to paint Robin as a victim of circumstantial evidence, but the jury saw through it. The evidence was overwhelming. The timeline was damning. The motive was clear. On January 6, 1994, Robin Lee Rowe was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and aggravated arson. The judge sentenced her to death. She became the only woman on Idaho's death row, a distinction she still holds to this day. Appeals on ineffective counsel grounds have all failed. Robin remains incarcerated at the Pocatello Women's Center, her execution on indefinite hold as Idaho's death penalty protocols shift and stall. But in Boise, The memory of Randy, Joshua, and Tabitha lives on in ways Robin never anticipated. The community came together in the weeks after the fire, holding vigils on Seneca Street. Candles flickered in the cold February night. Neighbors who barely knew the Rose wept openly. Scholarships were established in Joshua and Tabitha's names, ensuring other kids could chase dreams these two never got to see. At sentencing, the judge's words echoed through the courtroom and into the community's collective grief. He called Robin's actions the ultimate betrayal of motherhood, and he was right. Randy trusted her. Joshua and Tabitha called her Mom and believed she would protect them. Instead, she made sure they couldn't escape. She removed their chance to wake up, to run, to live. Randy never got another Saturday by the river. Joshua's baseball card collection burned with him. Tabitha's laugh, gone. Snuffed out by someone who should have been their safeguard. This is where evil hides sometimes. Not in shadows or strangers, but in the person who tucks you in at night. In the one who's supposed to love you most. Robin Lee Rowe stole 3 lives for money. And in doing so, she reminded an entire community that the most dangerous threats don't always come from outside the home. Joshua and Tabitha deserved better. They deserved to grow up, to have families of their own, to laugh and fish and live. If you believe their story needs to be heard, hit that subscribe button, not for me, but so their names are never forgotten. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Let's build a community that refuses to let these victims fade into silence. Most of you watching haven't subscribed yet. If this story moved you, that button costs you nothing, but it means everything to keeping their memory alive. Case 2. Lori Vallow Daybell, 2019 to 2020. June 9th, 2020. Salem, Idaho. A small rural town where everyone knows everyone, where secrets are hard to keep. But Chad Daybell had kept one. Cadaver dogs moved slowly across his property, noses low, trained to detect what the living would rather not find. Near a pet cemetery in the backyard, one dog stopped, alerted, then another. Detectives began to dig. What they unearthed wasn't a beloved family pet. It was 7-year-old J.J. Vallow, bound in plastic and duct tape, his small body wrapped so tightly it was clear someone wanted to make sure he stayed hidden. Nearby, in a fire pit, they found what remained of 16-year-old Tylee Ryan, burned, dismembered, her bones mixed with ash and charred debris, the kind of destruction that takes time, effort, intent. 2 children, buried in a backyard like trash. J.J. Vallow was pure energy, the kind of kid who couldn't sit still, who bounced on trampolines until his legs gave out, who lit up every room he entered. He had special needs, required extra attention, extra love, and for a while, he got it. His adoptive mother, Lori Vallow, seemed devoted. She posted photos of him smiling, playing, living. But behind those pictures, something dark was growing. Tylee Ryan was 16, beautiful, bright, fiercely protective of her little brother. In early September of 2019, she stood at Yellowstone National Park, posing for a photo with JJ and Lori. Her smile was genuine, relaxed. She had no idea that would be the last photo anyone would ever take of her alive. September 8th, 2019, the last confirmed sighting of Tylee Ryan. 2 weeks later, on September 22nd, JJ was seen for the last time, jumping on a trampoline at their Rexburg apartment complex. Neighbors remembered his laugh, his boundless energy, and then silence. What happened between those September days and June's grim discovery is a descent into fanaticism so extreme, so detached from reality, that it defies comprehension. Lori Vallow met Chad Daybell sometime in 2018. Chad was a self-proclaimed prophet, an author of apocalyptic fiction who believed he could see into the spiritual realm. He talked about light and dark spirits. He rated people on a scale, how close to God, how far from evil. He believed the end times were imminent, that only the worthy would survive. And Lori became a true believer. She started talking about zombies, people whose bodies had been taken over by dark spirits, people who needed to be freed. And according to Lori's new twisted theology, JJ and Tylee weren't her children anymore. They were zombies, possessed, dark. They needed to be freed. Tylee disappeared first. After that Yellowstone trip, she was never seen again. Lori told people Tylee was staying with relatives, that she was in college, that she didn't want to be contacted. Lies stacked on lies. Then JJ vanished. Lori told his school he'd be homeschooled. Told concerned family members he was fine, just busy. When JJ's grandparents pushed for proof of life, Lori went silent. Then she ran. But before she fled Idaho, another death occurred. Tammy Daybell, Chad's wife of nearly 30 years, died suddenly in her sleep on October 19, 2019. She was only 49, healthy, active. Her death was initially ruled natural causes, but the timing was suspicious. Chad didn't ask for an autopsy. He had Tammy cremated within days. 2 weeks later, Chad and Lori were married in a beachside ceremony in Hawaii, smiling, celebrating, while 2 children lay buried in Chad's backyard and Tammy's ashes sat in an urn. When authorities began asking questions in late November, where were the kids? Why hadn't anyone seen them? Lori lied. She said JJ was with a friend in Arizona. She said Tylee was away at college. She refused to cooperate. And in December of 2019, she and Chad fled to Hawaii, renting a condo on Kauai, living off the grid while the search for JJ and Tylee intensified. Family members went public. JJ's grandparents, Larry and Kay Woodcock, pleaded on national television. Where were the children? Why wouldn't Lori answer? The case exploded across media outlets. Rexburg police, the FBI, volunteers, all searching for 2 kids who had seemingly vanished into thin air. Investigators dug into phone records, and they found something damning. Alex Cox, Lori's brother, who conveniently died of natural causes in December 2019 before he could be charged, had been at Chad's property on the mornings after both disappearances. His phone pinged near the burial sites. He was there when JJ was buried. He was there when Tylee's remains were burned and hidden. Alex never faced charges. He died suddenly, just like Tammy. Just like the kids. Convenient deaths. All of them. On June 9, 2020, the search ended. JJ and Tylee were found, and the nation reeled. Lori was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and grand theft. She had continued to collect Social Security survivor benefits for both children, long after they were dead, pocketing thousands of dollars, while their bodies decomposed in Chad's yard. Her trial began in April of 2023. Prosecutors presented a chilling timeline. The religious fanaticism, the zombie theology, the financial motive, life insurance policies, Social Security benefits, the cover-up, the lies, the complete lack of remorse. Lori sat in court, stone-faced. No tears for JJ. No grief for Tylee. Nothing. On May 12, 2023, the jury found her guilty on all counts. 2 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy, grand theft. On July 31st, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Chad Daybell's trial followed in 2024. He was charged not only with the murders of JJ and Tylee, but also with the murder of his wife, Tammy. Investigators had exhumed her body, and the autopsy revealed she hadn't died naturally. She'd been asphyxiated. Chad had killed his wife to be with Lori, killed 2 children who got in the way of their delusional apocalyptic fantasy. On June 3, 2024, Chad was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to death, but no sentence will bring JJ and Tylee back. Rexburg holds remembrance walks every year now. Hundreds gather, wearing purple ribbons, Tylee's favorite color. They walk the streets where JJ used to play, where Tylee used to smile. They chant the kids' names. They refuse to let them be forgotten. Statewide, purple ribbons appear on porches, in windows, on car antennas. A silent testament that Idaho will not let fanaticism erase 2 innocent lives. JJ never got to grow up, never got to jump on trampolines as a teenager, to graduate, to live. Tylee never got to go to prom, to fall in love, to become the woman she was meant to be. They were erased by the very people who should have protected them. And for what? A twisted fantasy, a delusion, greed. This case is a reminder that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a mother. Sometimes it wears a smile, posts photos on social media, and talks about God. Sometimes it convinces itself that murder is mercy, that death is freedom. Lori Vallow Daybell will spend the rest of her life in prison. Chad Daybell waits on death row. But JJ and Tylee? They're gone. And no amount of justice will ever change that. Case 3. Monique and Eric Osuna, 2020. September 2nd, 2020. Meridian, Idaho. Paramedics rushed through the front door of a quiet suburban home, the kind with a manicured lawn and a 2-car garage. Inside, they found 9-year-old Emric Osuna on the floor, cold, unresponsive, his skin pale, almost translucent. When they lifted him onto the stretcher, they felt how light he was. Too light. At the hospital, they weighed him. 44 pounds. A 9-year-old boy. 44 pounds. Emric should have been in 4th grade. Should have been riding bikes with friends, playing video games, complaining about homework. He should have been visible, to teachers, to neighbors, to anyone who might have noticed something was wrong. But Emric wasn't in school. He was at home, isolated, hidden, and in that isolation, he endured a year of torture so systematic, so calculated, that it defies every instinct of what a parent is supposed to be. Emric wasn't a troublemaker. He wasn't violent or out of control. He was a child who needed love, structure, safety. Instead, he got Monique Osuna, his stepmother, and a father, Eric Osuna, who stood by and did nothing. What happened inside that Meridian home didn't come to light through neighbors or teachers or concerned relatives. It came to light through nanny cam footage, hours and hours of recorded abuse, saved on devices, time-stamped and undeniable. Video evidence of a child being destroyed, piece by piece. The footage is haunting. Monique stands over Emric, screaming at him for hours, not minutes, hours, berating him, belittling him, breaking him down until there's nothing left but a shell of a child. She forces him into punishing exercises, wall sits, planks, squats, holding positions until his legs shake and give out. When he collapses, she screams louder, makes him start over, again, and again, and again. He's not allowed to eat. Food is withheld as punishment, as control. Emric grows thinner, weaker. His body begins to consume itself just to survive. At night, when most children are tucked into warm beds, Emric is locked in the garage, alone, cold. In Idaho, where September nights dip below freezing, a 9-year-old boy shivers on a concrete floor, with no blanket, no heat, no comfort, just punishment, just isolation. And Eric? He films it. He holds the camera, records his son's suffering, and does nothing. Doesn't intervene, doesn't stop Monique, doesn't protect his child. He watches, he documents, he enables. By the time paramedics arrived, Emric's body had been through months of starvation, blunt force trauma, and exposure. At Street, Luke's Children's Hospital, doctors catalogued the damage: severe malnutrition, hypothermia, bruising in various stages of healing, muscle wasting, organ stress. His body had been fighting to survive for so long that it simply couldn't anymore. Emric Osuna died because the people who were supposed to care for him decided he was disposable. Investigators seized the nanny cam footage. What they saw was worse than they imagined. This wasn't a moment of lost control. This wasn't a parent snapping under stress. This was sustained, deliberate, sadistic abuse. Day after day, week after week, month after month. Recorded, saved, rewatched. Monique and Eric were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. In February of 2022, Monique Osuna pleaded guilty. No trial, no defense. The evidence was overwhelming, and she knew it. In June of that year, She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She will die behind bars, and even that feels insufficient for what she did. Eric followed suit. In October of 2022, he entered a similar guilty plea. Life without parole. He didn't pull the trigger, didn't strike the fatal blow, but he was complicit in every moment of Emmeric's suffering. He had the power to stop it and chose not to. In the eyes of the law, that made him just as guilty. At sentencing, Judge Stephen Hippler didn't mince words. He called it evil, disguised as discipline, and that's exactly what it was. Monique and Eric framed their abuse as parenting, as structure, as teaching Emmerich a lesson. But there was no lesson. There was only cruelty. Emmerich's death shook Meridian to its core. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was a child who lived among them, in a neighborhood with sidewalks and streetlights and families. And no one knew, no one saw, because Emmerich was kept out of sight. Candlelight vigils filled the streets. Hundreds of people gathered, holding candles, holding signs with Emmerich's name, demanding that this never happen again. Parents hugged their children tighter. Teachers wondered how many other kids were slipping through the cracks. And that's the question that haunts this case. How many children are right now, in this moment, isolated in their homes, suffering in silence, invisible to the systems designed to protect them? The pandemic had forced many kids into remote learning. Schools shifted online. Zoom classes replaced physical classrooms. And for most kids, that was an inconvenience. But for kids like Emmerich, it was a death sentence. No teacher saw him in person. No cafeteria worker noticed he wasn't eating. No counselor picked up on the signs. He vanished into a home where he was tortured, and the world kept spinning. In response, Meridian and surrounding communities overhauled child abuse prevention programs. Schools implemented check-ins for remote learners, mandatory video calls, welfare visits, partnerships with local law enforcement to ensure isolated kids were seen and safe. Legislators pushed for stronger reporting requirements, for systems that wouldn't allow a child to disappear just because they weren't physically sitting in a classroom. But for Emmerich, those changes came too late. He spent the last year of his life in pain, in fear, in isolation. He had no escape, no one to turn to, no one who saw him as anything other than a burden, a problem, something to be controlled and punished and silenced. Emmerich Osuna was 9 years old. He should have been building Lego sets and arguing with friends and learning long division. He should have been safe. Instead, he was starved, beaten, frozen, and discarded by the two people who were legally and morally obligated to protect him. Monique and Eric Osuna are in prison. They'll never walk free, but that doesn't undo what they did. It doesn't give Emmerich back his childhood. It doesn't erase the hours of suffering captured on video. It doesn't bring him back. This case is a reminder that abuse doesn't always happen in the shadows. Sometimes it happens in broad daylight, in suburban homes, behind closed doors. And the most vulnerable among us, the children who are isolated, who are kept out of sight, who have no voice, are the ones who need us to look closer, to ask questions, to refuse to look away. Emmerich needed someone to see him, to save him, and no one did, until it was too late. Case 4. Veronica Lynn Herrera, 2012. Homerdale, Idaho. A small town tucked near the Oregon border, where everyone knows everyone, and secrets don't stay buried for long. But some secrets burn. Deputies pulled up to a weathered trailer on a cold evening, responding to a missing child report. The call had come in frantic, vague, suspicious. As they stepped out of their patrol cars, they saw it. A burned barrel in the backyard, glowing orange in the dimness. Still hot, still smoldering. They approached cautiously. The smell hit them first. Not wood, not trash. Something else, something sickening. Inside the barrel, among the ashes and twisted metal, they found the charred remains of 2-year-old Nikita Herrera, the little girl everyone called Keta. She was 2 years old, 24 months of life. She had just started stringing sentences together, her toddler voice full of wonder and questions. She loved Minnie Mouse, wore mini shirts, clutched a mini doll everywhere she went, pointed at the TV and squealed when she saw those iconic ears. Her laugh was loud and unfiltered, the kind that made adults smile even on their worst days. She had her whole life ahead of her. Birthdays and first days of school and scraped knees and bedtime stories. Instead, she was burned in a barrel like garbage. Deputies secured the scene and called in investigators. This wasn't an accident. You don't accidentally incinerate a child. Inside the trailer, they found blood spatters on the walls, small, inconsistent with any story Veronica Herrera would later try to tell. Patterns that suggested violence. Patterns that suggested something happened before the fire. Veronica claimed Keita had fallen. An accident. Kids fall all the time, right? But the blood told a different story. And then investigators talked to Keita's 7-year-old sibling. Children don't lie about things like this. Not in the way adults do. When asked what happened to Keita, the 7-year-old looked investigators in the eye and said, "Mom put Keita in the fire." 5 words. 5 words that shattered any remaining doubt. Forensic anthropologists were brought in. They sifted through the burn barrel, piece by piece, recovering bone fragments, trying to reconstruct what was left of a little girl who had barely begun to live. They managed to reconstruct 85% of Keita's skeleton. 85%. That's how thorough the burning was. Veronica had left that barrel glowing for hours, making sure as much evidence as possible was destroyed. But you can't destroy the truth. Not completely. The bones told their story. The blood spatters told their story. The 7-year-old told their story. And all of it pointed to one person, Veronica Lynn Herrera. She was charged with first-degree murder, evidence destruction, failure to report a death, and 3 additional felony child injury counts. The evidence was overwhelming, but Veronica avoided trial. She took a plea deal, pled guilty to involuntary manslaughter and the other charges. Involuntary manslaughter, as if Keita's death was some tragic mishap, some moment of poor judgment. On September 21, 2013, Veronica was sentenced to 30 years in prison, 15 years fixed before she'd even be eligible for parole. The judge made it clear this wasn't lenience. This was the harshest sentence the plea deal would allow. Veronica would spend the prime of her life behind bars, and even that felt inadequate for what she'd done. Keita's father hadn't been in the picture. Extended family had tried to stay involved, but Veronica kept them at arm's length, kept Keita isolated, kept control, and in that isolation, a 2-year-old was murdered and burned. Her existence nearly erased, but Homedale wouldn't let Keita be erased. Every year, community members gather for a candlelight vigil. They stand in the spot where that burn barrel once glowed. They hold candles. They say Keita's name. They place Minnie Mouse tokens, stuffed dolls, pins, drawings at a small roadside memorial. Pink and red and white, Minnie's polka dots bright against the Idaho dust. A reminder that Keita loved something, that she had favorites and joys and a personality. Parents bring their toddlers to the vigils. It's a somber teaching moment, a reminder to watch for signs, to ask questions, to intervene when something feels wrong. Because Keita was right there, in Homedale, in a trailer where neighbors passed by, and no one knew until it was too late. The case haunted investigators. The image of that glowing barrel, the smell, the tiny bones pieced together on an examination table, it stays with you. One detective said in an interview years later that he still thinks about Keita, wonders what she would have been like at 5, at 10, at 16. Wonders what she would have become. We'll never know. Veronica stole that from her. Stole every birthday, every milestone, every moment Keita should have had. And for what? Because a toddler cried too much? Because she was inconvenient? Because Veronica didn't want to be a mother anymore? There's no reason that makes sense. No explanation that justifies putting a 2-year-old in a burn barrel and watching her turn to ash. Keita's 7-year-old sibling carries that memory forever. Carries the knowledge of what their mother did, what they witnessed, what they had the courage to tell investigators. That child is a hero. Without that disclosure, Veronica might have walked free, might have claimed it was an accident, a tragedy, a terrible twist of fate. But the truth came out. From the mouth of a 7-year-old who refused to let their baby sister's death be covered up. Kata deserved more. She deserved to grow up, to go to kindergarten, to make friends, to keep loving Minnie Mouse and discovering new things to love. She deserved a mother who protected her, not one who destroyed her. Homerdale remembers. The Minnie Mouse tokens pile up every year. The vigils continue. Kata's name is spoken, honored, held in a community that refuses to let her be forgotten. Veronica Herrera is in prison. She won't be eligible for parole until 2028 at the earliest. And when that day comes, the community will be there, ready to remind the parole board exactly what she did, ready to make sure Kata's voice is still heard, even from beyond the grave. 4 cases in, and I need to pause for just 10 seconds. If you're still watching, you care. But caring isn't enough, action is. Comment right now. What time is it where you are? Are you watching this alone, or with someone? I want to know who's standing with these victims. Only a fraction of you have liked this video. If you think Kata's story, and the others, deserve to be seen by more people, tap that like button. It's free, it's fast, and it pushes this video to people who need to hear it. Case 5. Daniel Ehrlich Jr. and Melissa Jenkins, 2009. July 24th, 2009. Boise, Idaho. 8-year-old Robbie Manuel vanished from his apartment. One moment he was there, a small boy with a shy smile and too quiet voice, and the next, he was gone. His mother, Melissa Jenkins, stood in front of news cameras, tears streaming down her face, begging for his safe return. She clutched a photo of Robbie, her voice breaking as she pleaded with whoever took him to bring her baby home. But Melissa already knew where Robbie was. She'd been there when it happened. 10 days later, canal workers near Kuna were doing routine maintenance along the New York Canal when they saw something submerged near the bank. At first, they thought it was debris, a bag, maybe, caught on the rocks. But as they got closer, the shape became clear. It was a body, small, weighted down with rocks. A child. It was Robbie Manuel. Robbie was 8 years old. He lived in a Boise apartment with his mother and her boyfriend, Daniel Ehrlich Jr. Life wasn't easy. The apartment was cramped, the walls thin, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbor's arguments through the drywall. Robbie kept to himself mostly. He was a quiet kid, polite, soft-spoken, the kind of boy teachers described as sweet and no trouble at all. He liked drawing, liked watching cartoons, liked the simple things kids his age are supposed to enjoy. But at home, Robbie lived in fear. Daniel Ehrlich Jr. wasn't Robbie's father, but he acted like he owned the boy. And Melissa, Robbie's own mother, let him. Worse, she participated. In the weeks leading up to Robbie's disappearance, neighbors heard things. Shouting, thuds, a child crying. But no one called the police. No one knocked on the door. No one intervened. It's easy to mind your own business when the walls are thin and you tell yourself it's probably nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Behind that apartment door, Robbie was being tortured. Daniel beat him, repeatedly. Blunt force trauma to the ribs, to the abdomen, to the head. Robbie's small body couldn't take it. His ribs fractured, internal organs hemorrhaged. And when Robbie cried, because of course he cried, Daniel restrained him with duct tape, wrapped it around his wrists, his ankles, his mouth, silenced him. Melissa watched. She didn't stop it, didn't call for help, didn't take Robbie and run. She stayed. She enabled. She became complicit in her own son's murder. On July 24th, Robbie died. Not from drowning, though his body was found in a canal. The water didn't kill him. Blunt force trauma did. His body had been so badly beaten that by the time he took his last breath, there was nothing left to save. Daniel and Melissa panicked. They couldn't call 911, couldn't explain the broken ribs, the duct tape residue, the bruises in various stages of healing. So they did what killers do. They hid the evidence. They wrapped Robbie's body, weighted it down with rocks, drove to the New York Canal near Kuna under the cover of night, And they dumped him, threw an 8-year-old boy into the water like he was trash, like he didn't matter, like he was never loved. Then Melissa went on TV and cried. She stood in front of cameras and begged for Robbie's return. She held vigils. She posted flyers. She played the role of devastated mother so convincingly that for a few days, people believed her. The community rallied. Volunteers searched fields and parking lots. Tips poured in. Everyone wanted to bring Robbie home. Except Robbie was already gone. And Melissa knew it. Investigators grew suspicious quickly. Melissa's story had inconsistencies. She claimed Robbie was playing outside and just vanished, but neighbors didn't remember seeing him that day. She said she'd been home all evening, but her timeline didn't match up. And then there was Daniel. Quiet, evasive, refusing to make eye contact. Detectives pulled cell site records. Daniel's phone pinged near the New York Canal on the night Robbie disappeared. Not near the apartment. Not near any place he claimed to be. Near the canal. Right where Robbie's body would later be found. Cadaver dogs were brought in. They alerted on Melissa's car. The scent of death. Of decomposition. Robbie had been in that car. His body had been transported. The evidence was undeniable. Daniel and Melissa were arrested. Charged with first-degree murder, torture, failure to report a death. The prosecution laid it out in excruciating detail. The weeks of abuse, the duct tape restraints, the beating that killed him, the cover-up, the canal, the lies. Daniel's trial began in September of 2011. The defense tried to argue that Melissa was the primary abuser, that Daniel was just a bystander. But the evidence didn't support that. Daniel's hands had been on Robbie. Daniel's phone had been at the canal. Daniel had participated, fully and willingly. The jury deliberated and came back with a verdict. Guilty. First-degree murder. Murder by torture. Failure to report a death. The judge sentenced Daniel Ehrlich Jr. to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He will die in prison. And even that doesn't feel like enough. Melissa took a plea deal. She admitted to aiding and abetting in Robbie's death, to helping cover it up, to standing by while her son was tortured and killed. In exchange for her cooperation and guilty plea, she was sentenced to life in prison with a 25-year fixed minimum before parole eligibility. 25 years. For helping murder her own child. Robbie's father hadn't been in the picture. Extended family had tried to stay involved, but Melissa pushed them away, kept Robbie isolated, kept control. And in that isolation, an 8-year-old boy was beaten to death. Boise was gutted. The community that had searched for Robbie, that had held out hope he'd be found alive, now had to reckon with the fact that his own mother had been lying the entire time. That she'd stood in front of cameras and wept crocodile tears while her son's body lay weighted at the bottom of a canal. Every summer now, Boise holds a charity run in Robbie's name. Hundreds of people show up, wearing blue ribbons, Robbie's favorite color. They run through the streets he should have grown up on, past the parks he should have played in. The proceeds go to child abuse prevention programs, to organizations that fight for kids who can't fight for themselves. Blue ribbons appear on porches, tied to mailboxes, hanging from rearview mirrors. A quiet, constant reminder that Robbie Manuel mattered, that his life had value, that he deserved better than what he got. Robbie should have made it to 9, to 10, to 18. He should have graduated high school, gotten his driver's license, fallen in love, made mistakes, learned lessons, lived a full and messy and beautiful life. Instead, he was duct-taped, beaten, and drowned by the 2 people who were supposed to protect him. Daniel Ehrlich Jr. and Melissa Jenkins are in prison. Robbie is gone, and no amount of justice will ever balance that equation. But Boise remembers. Every summer, they run. Every year, the blue ribbons go up, and Robbie's name is spoken, honored, and held close by a community that refuses to let him be just another statistic. He was a boy. He was loved, maybe not by his mother, but by the community that searched for him, mourned him, and now carries his memory forward. Robbie Manuel deserved better, and we owe it to him to make sure no other child suffers the way he did. Case 6. Elizabeth Ann Baker Keys, 2020. Rathdrum, Idaho. April 17, 2020. Elizabeth Keys's mother walked into her daughter's room on Ramsey Road. Maybe to drop off laundry, maybe just to check in. She opened the closet, and there, hidden beneath clothes and blankets, wrapped in plastic, was the body of a newborn baby boy. 3 days old. 3 days dead. He never had a name. Never took a breath outside that room. Never felt sunlight on his skin or heard a lullaby or was held with love. He was born, and within minutes, he was killed, strangled, slashed, hidden, erased. Elizabeth Ann Baker Keys was 22 years old. She lived at home with her mother in a quiet Rathdrum neighborhood. To everyone around her, life seemed normal. She went about her days, wore loose clothing, kept to herself. No one knew she was pregnant. Not her mother, not her friends, no one. Elizabeth had carried a baby to full term, 40 weeks, and managed to hide it completely. No doctor visits, no ultrasounds, no prenatal care. She researched online how to conceal a pregnancy, how to explain away weight gain, how to avoid suspicion. She knew what she was doing, and she knew what she planned to do. On April 14, 2020, Elizabeth went into labor. Alone, in her bedroom. She didn't call for help, didn't go to a hospital, didn't reach out to anyone. She delivered the baby by herself, a full-term, healthy boy. He was alive. He cried. He breathed. And then Elizabeth killed him. She took a bathrobe belt, soft fabric, the kind you tie around your waist after a shower, and wrapped it around her newborn son's neck. She strangled him, squeezed until he stopped crying, until he stopped breathing, until he stopped moving. But she didn't stop there. She took a box cutter and slashed his tiny torso. Deep cuts, deliberate. As if strangling wasn't enough. As if she needed to make absolutely sure he was gone. Then she wrapped him in plastic, hid him in her closet, and went about her life. For 3 days, his body decomposed in that closet while Elizabeth ate meals with her mother, scrolled through her phone, pretended everything was fine, until her mother found him. The scene was horrific. First responders arrived and found the newborn's body in advanced decomposition. The smell, the sight, the realization that this baby had been hidden just feet away from where his grandmother slept, where family gathered, where life went on as if nothing had happened. Elizabeth was taken into custody immediately. Investigators seized her phone, her laptop, her search history. What they found was damning. In the weeks leading up to the birth, Elizabeth had searched for things like late-term miscarriage symptoms, how to hide a pregnancy, what happens if you give birth alone. She wasn't confused. She wasn't panicking. She was planning. She knew she was pregnant. She knew the baby was coming. And she decided, long before labor started, that he wouldn't live. Detectives interviewed Elizabeth. She was calm, detached. She admitted to the birth, admitted to the strangulation, admitted to hiding the body. But she showed no remorse, no tears, no indication that she understood the gravity of what she'd done. This wasn't postpartum psychosis. This wasn't a moment of panic or desperation. This was premeditated neonaticide, the intentional killing of a newborn within the first 24 hours of life. Elizabeth was charged with first-degree murder and destruction of evidence. The prosecution had everything they needed: physical evidence, search history, her own confession. This was an open and shut case. In April of 2021, Elizabeth entered an Alford plea. For those unfamiliar, an Alford plea means the defendant doesn't admit guilt, but acknowledges the prosecution has enough evidence to convict. It's a legal maneuver, a way to avoid trial without saying the words, "I did it." But the evidence spoke for itself. The judge sentenced Elizabeth Ann Baker Keys to 25 years in prison, 10 years fixed, 15 indeterminate. That means she'll serve at least 10 years before she's even eligible to be considered for parole. On top of that, she received a concurrent 5-year sentence for evidence concealment. It's one of the harshest neonaticide sentences in Idaho history, and it should be. Rathdrum struggled to process what had happened. This wasn't a big city with high crime rates. This was a small, tight-knit community where people knew their neighbors, where tragedies like this weren't supposed to happen, but they do, everywhere. The case sparked conversations across Idaho about neonaticide, about safe haven laws, about why women hide pregnancies, and what can be done to prevent these deaths. Idaho has a safe haven law. It allows parents to surrender a newborn, no questions asked, at any hospital, fire station, or medical facility within 30 days of birth. No legal consequences, no judgment, just safety for the baby. Elizabeth had options. She could have left him at a hospital, could have called 911, could have told her mother, could have done literally anything other than strangle and mutilate her own child. But she chose violence. She chose murder. And now a baby boy who never got a name, who never got a chance, is gone. There's something uniquely horrifying about neonaticide. It's the ultimate betrayal. A mother is supposed to be a child's first protector. The bond between mother and newborn is supposed to be sacred. But in cases like this, that bond is shattered before it even forms. This baby was alive. He had a heartbeat. He had potential. He could have been adopted, could have been loved by someone else if Elizabeth didn't want him. There were options. There were resources. There were people who would have helped. Instead, he was strangled, slashed, and stuffed in a closet. Elizabeth will be eligible for parole in 2031. She'll be in her early 30s, still young, still with a life ahead of her. But her son? He got minutes. Minutes of life before it was stolen. Rathdrum holds the memory of that unnamed boy close. Community advocates pushed for better education around safe haven laws, for outreach to young women who might be hiding pregnancies out of fear or shame. They want to make sure no other baby dies because someone felt they had no other choice. But Elizabeth had a choice. She had many, and she chose the one that ended a life before it even started. This case is a reminder that evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the first person a child meets. The one whose heartbeat they heard for 9 months. The one they should have been safest with. That baby boy deserved a name, deserved a life, deserved love. And Elizabeth Ann Baker Keys took all of that away in a matter of minutes. She'll spend the next decade behind bars. But he'll be gone forever. Case 7. Danielle Radu, 2020. Meridian, Idaho. A hospital emergency room. Doctors and nurses rushing. Alarms beeping. And on a gurney, a 2-month-old baby boy fighting for his life. Dawson McKinney arrived at the hospital with injuries no infant should ever have. A skull fracture, subdural hemorrhages, bleeding between the brain and skull, retinal bleeding in both eyes, the kind of trauma that doesn't happen by accident, the kind that requires force, violence, intent. Dawson was 2 months old, 8 weeks. He was still learning to focus his eyes, to track voices, to smile when someone leaned over his crib. He couldn't roll over yet, couldn't sit up, couldn't defend himself in any way. He was completely, utterly helpless. Just weeks away from his first major milestone, 3 months old, when babies start to coo and grab at toys and recognize faces. Dawson would never reach that milestone. He'd never reach any of them, because the person who was supposed to protect him hurt him instead. Danielle Radu was Dawson's mother. She was the one home with him that day, the one responsible for keeping him safe, the one who called 911 when Dawson stopped responding. When paramedics arrived, Danielle had a story ready. Dawson had slipped off the furniture. An accident. A terrible, tragic accident. She'd only looked away for a second. These things happen, right? Babies are fragile. But the doctors at the hospital weren't buying it. CT scans showed the severity of Dawson's injuries. A skull fracture doesn't come from slipping off a couch. Subdural hemorrhages don't happen from a minor bump. Retinal bleeding, especially the pattern they saw in Dawson's eyes, is a classic sign of abusive head trauma. Shaken baby syndrome. Violent, repetitive shaking that causes the brain to slam against the skull, tearing blood vessels, causing catastrophic damage. The medical team knew immediately. This wasn't an accident. This was abuse. Detectives were called in. They interviewed Danielle again, pressed her on the details. Her story started to crack. The timeline didn't make sense. The mechanism of injury didn't match. Furniture falls don't cause this level of trauma, but violent shaking does. Forensic pediatricians were brought in to testify. They explained to investigators, and later to the court, that the injuries Dawson sustained required significant force, repetitive force. The kind of shaking that happens when someone loses control, when frustration boils over, when a baby won't stop crying and the person responsible snaps. Danielle was the only one home with Dawson when he was injured. There was no one else to blame, no other explanation. She had been alone with her 2-month-old son, and in that time, she inflicted injuries so severe that his brain couldn't recover. Dawson McKinney died from his injuries. 2 months old, his whole life ahead of him. Gone. Danielle was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The evidence was overwhelming. The medical testimony was clear. There was no ambiguity here. This was a mother who killed her infant son. In April of 2022, Danielle Radu entered an Alford plea. She didn't admit guilt outright, but she acknowledged that the prosecution had enough evidence to convict her. It was a legal calculation, a way to avoid the unpredictability of a jury trial, a way to maintain some shred of deniability while accepting the consequences. On July 15, 2022, Danielle was sentenced to life in prison with 18 years fixed before parole eligibility. 18 years. Dawson didn't get 18 days. The judge didn't mince words. He spoke about the vulnerability of infants, about the sacred duty of parents to protect, not harm. He spoke about the violence required to cause Dawson's injuries. He spoke about a mother who failed in the most fundamental way possible, and then he sent Danielle to prison for the rest of her life. The case sent shockwaves through Meridian, particularly within the military community. Danielle's family had ties to the armed forces, and the case prompted difficult conversations about parental stress, about the challenges of new parenthood, about the resources available or not available to parents who are struggling. But here's the thing. Stress doesn't justify violence. Frustration doesn't excuse shaking a baby. There are resources, there are hotlines, there are people trained to help. Danielle had options. She could have put Dawson in his crib and walked away, could have called a friend, could have asked for help. Instead, she shook him so violently that his brain bled. Emergency rooms across Idaho updated their protocols in the wake of Dawson's death. Abusive head trauma training became mandatory for pediatric staff. Doctors, nurses, and social workers were trained to recognize the signs, to ask the hard questions, to look beyond the initial story parents tell. Because stories like Danielle's, he slipped, he fell, it was an accident, are common, and they're almost always lies. Babies don't fracture their skulls from minor falls. They don't develop retinal hemorrhages from rolling off a couch. The injuries speak for themselves. And in Dawson's case, they screamed. Dawson McKinney was 2 months old. He was just beginning to discover the world, just starting to smile, to make eye contact, to recognize his mother's voice. He should have grown up, should have learned to walk, to talk, to ride a bike, should have had first days of school and birthday parties and scraped knees and bedtime stories. Instead, he got 8 weeks. 8 weeks of life before his own mother took it away. Danielle Radu will spend at least 18 years in prison. She'll be middle-aged by the time she's even considered for parole. But Dawson? He's frozen at 2 months old. Forever. There's no undoing what she did. No sentence that brings him back. No amount of prison time that balances the equation. Dawson is gone. And the world is worse for it. This case is a reminder that infants are the most vulnerable among us. They can't speak, can't defend themselves, can't ask for help. They rely entirely on the adults around them to keep them safe. And when those adults fail, when they become the source of harm instead of protection, the consequences are irreversible. Dawson McKinney mattered. His 8 weeks of life mattered. And his death should matter enough that we do better, that we watch closer, that we intervene sooner. that we make sure no other baby suffers the way he did. Danielle is in prison, Dawson is gone, and nothing will ever make that right. 7 children. 7 lives stolen by the people who should have protected them. If you've made it this far, you're different. You're someone who refuses to look away. Tell me in the comments. What's the weather like where you are right now? Are you cozy and safe? These kids never got that chance. Share this video so someone else can hear their stories. Here's the truth. Over 70% of you haven't subscribed. If you want more deep dive true crime that honors victims, not sensationalizes them, subscribe. It's how we make sure their voices echo louder than their killers' names. Case 8. Amanda Dunlap and Joshua Molina, 2017. Josh broke my kid today. That's the text message Amanda Dunlap sent to a friend in October of 2017. Not something happened to my daughter, not I'm worried about Lyric, not I need help. Josh broke my kid. Attached to the message were photos, bruises, dark purple and blue marks across a toddler's tiny body. Evidence of violence, evidence of abuse, evidence that Amanda saw, documented, and did nothing about. Lyric Jean Altum was 20 months old, not even 2 years old yet. She had just started putting together 2-word sentences. More juice. Hi mama. The simple language of toddlers discovering how to communicate. She was caught in the middle of her parents' separation, shuttled between homes, learning to navigate a world that had already become unstable before she could even understand it. When her parents split, Lyric went to live with her mother, Amanda Dunlap, and Amanda's new boyfriend, Joshua Molina. It should have been a fresh start, a new chapter. Instead, it was the beginning of the end. Joshua Molina didn't want to be a father figure, didn't want the responsibility of a toddler. Lyric was an inconvenience, an obstacle, something in the way of his relationship with Amanda. And so he hurt her, repeatedly. The text messages Amanda sent to friends tell the story in brutal fragments. Josh broke my kid today. Another time, she won't stop crying and he's losing it. Photos of bruises, complaints about Lyric's behavior. Never once, I'm leaving. Never once, I'm calling the police. Never once, I'm protecting my daughter. Amanda documented the abuse and stayed. October 7th, 2017. Twin Falls, Idaho. Lyric began seizing. Her little body convulsed, eyes rolling back, limbs jerking. This wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't a fever. This was a medical emergency. Joshua Molina knew something was catastrophically wrong. But instead of calling 911, instead of rushing Lyric to a hospital, instead of doing anything a reasonable person would do, he did something unthinkable. He blew marijuana smoke in her face, as if getting a 20-month-old child high would stop a seizure. As if the problem was that she needed to relax. As if this was anything other than a desperate, delusional attempt to avoid consequences. Lyric kept seizing. Finally, a friend intervened. Someone with a shred of decency called for help. Paramedics arrived and found Lyric unresponsive. Her pupils weren't reacting. Her breathing was shallow. She was rushed to St. Luke's Magic Valley Regional Medical Center, where doctors realized immediately that her injuries were far beyond what the local hospital could handle. Lyric was airlifted to Boise. Pediatric specialists took over. CT scans revealed massive brain swelling, traumatic brain injury, the kind of damage that comes from violent impact, from being shaken or struck or slammed. Her brain was dying inside her skull. For 7 days, Lyric fought. Machines breathed for her. Monitors tracked every faltering heartbeat. Doctors did everything they could, but the damage was too severe. On October 14th, 2017, Lyric Jean Altum was pronounced dead, 20 months old, gone. Investigators immediately suspected abuse. The injuries didn't match any accidental fall. Toddlers are clumsy. They bump their heads. They tumble off couches, but they don't sustain fatal traumatic brain injuries from everyday accidents. And then there were the text messages, the photos, the documented history of violence. Amanda's phone became the prosecution's smoking gun. Message after message, photo after photo, a timeline of escalating abuse that she witnessed, recorded, and allowed to continue. She knew Joshua was hurting Lyric. She texted about it. She complained about it. But she never stopped it. Joshua Molina was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Amanda was charged as an accessory with felony injury to a child. The evidence seemed overwhelming. The texts, the photos, the medical testimony. This should have been straightforward, but it wasn't. Joshua's first trial began in 2020. The prosecution laid out the case methodically. The abuse, the seizure, the marijuana smoke, the delay in getting help, the brain injury, the death. They had texts. They had medical experts. They had a dead toddler and a man who'd been alone with her when she sustained fatal injuries. But the jury couldn't reach a verdict. Hung jury, mistrial. Lyric's family was devastated. How could 12 people look at the evidence and not agree? How could there be any doubt? Prosecutors didn't give up. In 2022, Joshua Molina was retried. This time, the jury heard even more. Enhanced testimony, clearer timelines. The full scope of Lyric's suffering laid bare in excruciating detail. And this time, the jury got it right. Joshua Molina was convicted of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He will never walk free. He will die behind bars. And even that feels insufficient for what he did. Amanda's case took longer. She'd been complicit, yes, but the legal system struggled with how to hold her accountable. She hadn't physically killed Lyric, but she'd allowed it to happen. She'd stayed with the man who was hurting her daughter. She'd documented abuse and done nothing. In 2023, Amanda Dunlap accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to lesser child abuse felonies. She was sentenced to 10 years indeterminate, meaning no fixed minimum, entirely at the discretion of the parole board. With 5.5 years of credit for time already served, she could potentially be released in just a few more years. The disparity in sentencing sparked outrage. Joshua got life. Amanda, who sent texts saying "Josh broke my kid and did nothing," could be out in under a decade. Advocates argued she was just as guilty, that failing to protect your child is its own form of violence. That Lyric's blood was on Amanda's hands, too. But the legal system often treats mothers who enable abuse more leniently than the abusers themselves, and in this case, Amanda benefited from that inequity. Twin Falls held vigils for Lyric. Hundreds gathered, holding candles, holding signs with her face on them. She had a smile that could light up a room, bright, toothless, pure joy, the kind of smile that made you forget whatever was bothering you. That smile was gone, snuffed out by a man who saw her as an inconvenience and a mother who cared more about keeping her boyfriend than protecting her child. The case prompted legislative hearings across Idaho. Lawmakers debated mandatory reporting laws. Should friends who receive texts like "Josh broke my kid" be legally obligated to call authorities? Should documenting abuse without intervening be prosecutable? Should mothers who enable abusers face the same charges as the abusers themselves? The conversations continue. The laws are still evolving. But for Lyric, it's too late. She was 20 months old. She should have turned 2. Should have had a birthday party with cake and balloons. Should have learned to ride a tricycle, to sing songs, to ask a million questions. Should have started preschool, made friends, grown up. Instead, she's buried in a cemetery in Twin Falls. Her gravestone has her name, her dates, and a small carved heart. Visitors leave toys, stuffed animals, plastic flowers, little trinkets, reminders that she was loved, even if not by the people who should have loved her most. Amanda Dunlap knew. She saw the bruises. She read her own texts. She watched Joshua hurt her daughter and did nothing. That's not passivity. That's complicity. That's choosing a man over a child. That's failing in the most fundamental way a mother can fail. Joshua Molina is a monster. But Amanda enabled the monster, gave him access, gave him opportunity, gave him her daughter. Lyric Jean Altom deserved better. She deserved a mother who would have grabbed her and run the first time Joshua raised a hand. She deserved safety. She deserved love. She deserved to live. Twin Falls remembers her. The vigils continue. The purple ribbons, purple for domestic violence awareness, hang throughout the city. Lyric's name is spoken, honored, remembered. Joshua will die in prison. Amanda might walk free in a few years, and Lyric will be gone forever. That's not justice, but it's the closest thing we'll ever get. Case 9. Kathy Lynn Wynn, 1989. Street Luke's Hospital, Boise, Idaho. The nurses knew Zerick Wynn. He'd been there before. Multiple times. A 9-year-old boy with recurring mysterious symptoms. Confusion, nausea, weakness, kidney problems. They'd run tests, treated him, sent him home, and then he'd come back, sicker each time. This time was different. When Zerick arrived, the nurses noticed something immediately. A smell. Sweet. Chemical. Not the normal hospital smells of antiseptic and illness. This was something else. Something wrong. It clung to Zerick, faint but unmistakable, like his body was trying to expel something toxic. Zerick was confused, disoriented, his words slurred, his eyes unfocused. He couldn't tell the doctors what hurt, couldn't explain what was happening. He just knew he felt bad, really bad, and he trusted the doctors to make it better, just like he trusted his mother. Kathy Lynn Wynn sat by his bedside, concerned, attentive, asking questions, playing the role of worried mother. The nurses didn't suspect her. Why would they? Mothers don't hurt their children. Mothers protect. But on October 27th, 1989, 9-year-old Zerick Wynn died. The doctors were stunned. They'd been treating him for weeks, monitoring his symptoms, running tests. Nothing had indicated he was in immediate danger. Yes, he was sick. Yes, his kidneys were failing. But death? So suddenly? It didn't add up. An autopsy was ordered immediately, and that's when the truth came out. Zerick's blood contained lethal levels of dizipramine, a tricyclic antidepressant, not a medication prescribed to him, not something a 9-year-old should ever have in his system. Lethal levels, enough to shut down his organs, enough to kill. The medical examiner found crystalline deposits in Zerick's kidneys. His body had been trying desperately to filter the poison out, but there was too much, too often. His kidneys had crystallized, literally turned brittle, with the buildup of a drug that should never have been there. Investigators dug deeper. How was Zerick ingesting dizipramine? He wasn't swallowing pills. He was 9. Someone would have noticed. The answer was chilling. Kathy Lynn Wynn had been crushing the medication into powder and mixing it into Zerick's hot chocolate. His favorite drink. The thing he looked forward to before bed. The small comfort in his confusing, painful world. And his mother had turned it into poison. Every night, Zerick drank his hot chocolate, trusted his mother, loved her, believed she was taking care of him. And every night, she was slowly killing him. The repeated hospital visits weren't mysterious. They were the result of ongoing poisoning. Kathy would dose Zerick, watch him get sick, take him to the hospital, play the concerned mother, bring him home, and do it again, over and over. A cycle of torture, disguised as care. Why? Investigators found a $25,000 life insurance policy on Zerick. Kathy was the beneficiary. $25,000. That's what her son's life was worth to her. But the financial motive was only part of the picture. When detectives interviewed Kathy, she made bizarre, unsettling claims. She talked about demons, about spiritual attacks. She claimed Zerick was possessed, that dark forces were after him. She even referenced another child, one who had died under suspicious circumstances, which she attributed to occult activity. Kathy wasn't just a murderer. She was delusional, detached from reality, and had convinced herself that poisoning her son was somehow justified. Or maybe she knew exactly what she was doing and used the demon story as a cover. Either way, Zerick was dead. The prosecution built an airtight case. The autopsy results, the dizipramine in his system, The life insurance policy, the repeated hospitalizations, the lack of any legitimate medical explanation. Kathy had motive, means, and opportunity. She had poisoned her son, slowly and methodically, over the course of weeks. Kathy Lynn Wynn was charged with first-degree murder. On June 4, 1990, her case went to trial. Not a jury trial, a bench trial, meaning a judge alone would decide her fate. The evidence was presented. Medical experts testified about the levels of dizipramine, about the impossibility of accidental ingestion, about the crystalline deposits that told the story of prolonged poisoning. Kathy's defense tried to argue that Zarek had somehow gotten into the medication on his own, that it was an accident, that she wasn't responsible. But the math didn't work. The levels were too high, the pattern too consistent. A child doesn't repeatedly, over weeks, accidentally ingest a medication kept out of reach. Judge Donald Ostler listened, weighed the evidence, and on June 4, 1990, found Kathy Lynn Wynn guilty of first-degree murder. He sentenced her to life in prison with a 16-year minimum before parole eligibility. 16 years. Zarek got 9 years of life. Kathy got a prison sentence shorter than the childhood she stole from her son. Zarek Wynn was 9 years old. He liked hot chocolate. He trusted his mother. He went to the hospital over and over, confused and scared, believing the doctors would figure out what was wrong. He never suspected that the person making him sick was the same person holding his hand in the hospital room. This case became a watershed moment in Idaho's medical community. Pediatricians across the state received training on Munchausen syndrome by proxy, now more commonly called caregiver-fabricated illness. It's a form of abuse, where a caregiver, usually a mother, makes a child sick to gain attention, sympathy, or financial benefit. The pattern is insidious. Repeated hospital visits, mysterious symptoms, a parent who seems overly concerned, overly involved, who craves the attention and sympathy that comes with having a sick child. And beneath it all, the parent is the one causing the illness. Zarek's case fit the profile perfectly. The repeated hospitalizations, Kathy's constant presence, the symptoms that never quite made sense, and the poison, administered secretly, regularly, lethally. Doctors are now trained to look for these patterns, to ask hard questions, to investigate when something doesn't add up, because children like Zarek can't advocate for themselves. They trust their caregivers. They don't suspect that the person bringing them hot chocolate is also bringing them death. Kathy Lynn Wynn is still in prison. She was eligible for parole as early as 2006, but as of the last available records, she remains incarcerated. Every parole hearing, Zarek's extended family and victim advocates show up to remind the board what she did, to make sure his voice is still heard, even decades later. Zarek should have turned 10, should have made it to middle school, high school, adulthood, should have had a career, a family, a life. Instead, he got 9 years, 9 years of life. The last several months of which were spent in pain, confusion, and betrayal. His mother, the person he trusted most, was the one killing him. And that's a level of evil that no sentence can ever truly address. Zarek Wynn mattered. His repeated hospital visits weren't just medical mysteries. They were cries for help that no one understood until it was too late. His story changed how Idaho's medical community approaches suspected abuse. His death saved future children by teaching doctors to look closer, to question more, to protect the most vulnerable. But Zarek himself? He's gone. Poisoned by hot chocolate. Killed by trust. Kathy Lynn Wynn will spend the rest of her life behind bars. And Zarek will spend eternity at 9 years old, frozen in time, a victim of the one person who should have loved him most. Randy Rowe, Joshua Rowe, Tabitha Rowe, J.J. Vallow, Tylee Ryan, Emric Osuna, Nikita, Keta Herrera, Robbie Manuel, a newborn boy who never got a name, Dawson McKinney, Lyric Jean Oldham, Zarek Wynn. 12 names, 12 lives, 12 children who should still be here. These aren't just cases. These aren't statistics or true crime content to fill an hour of your day. These are children who loved, laughed, and trusted. Children who had favorite foods and favorite colors and favorite toys. Children who believed the people who were supposed to protect them actually would. Their voices were silenced, but ours don't have to be. Every single one of these cases shares a common thread: isolation, manipulation, betrayal by the very people who were supposed to be their safeguards. These children were hidden, kept out of schools, away from family, locked in homes where no one could see what was happening. And in that isolation, they suffered, they died. And for a moment, it seemed like they might be forgotten. But communities across Idaho refused to let that happen. Vigils lit up the darkness. Scholarships carried their names forward. Ribbons hung from porches and mailboxes. Legislation changed. Training programs were implemented. Grief transformed into vigilance. And these 12 names became rallying cries for a state that decided enough was enough. If you've watched all the way through, you're part of something bigger, a refusal to let these names disappear. You've spent over an hour bearing witness to their stories. That matters. You matter. One last thing. Comment below and tell me, where are you watching from and which victim's story will stay with you? I read every single comment. I want to know who's standing with these children, who's refusing to look away. Subscribe if you believe true crime should honor victims, not glorify killers. Like this video so the algorithm pushes it to people who need to hear these stories. Share it with someone who cares about justice. Because these stories don't end here. They end when we make sure no other child suffers the way these 12 did. Randy, Joshua, Tabitha, JJ, Tylee, Emric, Keta, Robbie, the unnamed baby, Dawson, Lyric, and Zerek. These children's stories are now part of you. Carry them forward. Let their names be known, their voices heard, their memories never forgotten. Thank you for bearing witness. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, silence protects no one.